My name is Sophia. I'm 25 years old, and for my entire life, my parents treated me like the rough draft, while my older brother was their masterpiece. I kept telling myself that if I just built something of my own, they would eventually see my worth. But the moment that finally made the truth impossible to ignore came at our family's Sunday dinner. When I announced I was starting my own business from nothing, my mother actually laughed in my face. She set her wine glass hard onto the table and said, "He has real potential, you don't." 12 extended family members sat in dead silence. My brother just smirked and kept buttering his roll. He got their savings. I got their skepticism. He was the investment. I was the punchline. I thought I could earn my place at their table. I was wrong. I walked away in silence that night. But my mother had no idea that the business she was mocking had already secured a massive contract with her own company's biggest client. By the time they saw my success online 6 months later and suddenly tried to pretend they supported me all along, what happened next was about to completely dismantle their golden child illusion and threaten everything my brother had been handed. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, let me take you back to understand how I ended up standing in my own office 6 months later with a signed contract and a family I no longer recognized. You have to understand the dynamic at my parents' dinner table. In our house, there was a very specific hierarchy. My brother Julian was 30, living in my parents' guest house, and currently on his fourth disruptive startup idea. He didn't have a job, but he had a venture capital fund, also known as my father's retirement account. Every Sunday dinner was a performance. Julian would sit at the head of the table next to my father, sketching out diagrams on paper napkins. He talked about scaling and market penetration. My parents watched him with a kind of hungry devotion, nodding at every word. They didn't just love him, they believed in him. They believed in the version of him that was always one check away from greatness. I sat at the far end of the table, near the kitchen door. I was the one who cleared the plates. I was the one who made sure the wine glasses stayed full. During one of these dinners, Julian was explaining why his last project, a luxury dog treat subscription, had failed. The market wasn't ready for the vision, he said, leaning back. I just need another 50,000 to pivot into the eco-friendly tech space. It's a sure thing. My father didn't even blink. He reached for his checkbook, which he kept in his breast pocket like a pack of gum. We believe in you, son. You've got the spark. He scribbled the numbers and handed the paper over. Julian tucked it away like it was a tip for good service. I felt the weight of my own bag under the table. Inside was a leather folder containing my business plan. I had spent 18 months working 12-hour shifts at a logistics firm, saving every cent, and staying up until 2:00 a.m. building my own supply chain consultancy. I didn't want a check. I wanted a lead. My mother ran a mid-sized firm that dealt with the exact regional manufacturers I was targeting. I actually have some news too, I said. My voice sounded small against the clinking of silverware. The table didn't go silent immediately. It took a moment for them to even notice I'd spoken. Julian continued buttering a roll, his eyes fixed on his phone. I've officially registered my consultancy, I said, pulling the folder out and placing it on the linen cloth. I've secured 3 small local vendors already. Mom, I was hoping you could take a look at my logistics model. I think I can save your firm about 15% on overhead. My mother didn't reach for the folder. She didn't even lean forward. She just picked up her wine glass, swirled the dark red liquid, and looked at me over the rim. Then she laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, which almost made it worse. It was a dismissive, pitying sound. "Sophia, honey," she said, setting the glass down with a sharp clack that seemed to echo. "That's adorable, really. But let's be realistic. You're a great assistant and you've always been steady, but you don't have the mind for this. Business isn't about filing papers. I'm not filing papers, Mom. I've built a proprietary bidding system, I replied. I pushed the folder toward her. Just look at the projections. She didn't look. She pushed the folder back toward me with one finger as if it were a dirty plate. Julian has real potential. He has the vision. You just don't. You're the support staff of this family, Sophia. There's no shame in that. Stop trying to compete with your brother. Julian smirked then. He didn't even look up from his roll. Yeah, Soph. Leave the heavy lifting to the entrepreneurs. Maybe you can help me with my filing once the new office is open. My father nodded, already back to talking to Julian about the Ecotech pivot. They moved on as if I hadn't spoken at all. I sat there, my hand still resting on the folder. The room felt very bright and very cold. I looked at the 12 extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, who were all there for the Sunday ritual. They saw it. They heard it. Not one of them said a word. They just kept eating their roast beef. That was the moment the cord snapped. It wasn't a big, dramatic explosion. It was just a quiet realization that I was sitting at a table where my chair didn't really exist. I stood up. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw my drink. I just tucked my business plan back into my bag. I think I'm done with dinner, I said. Oh, don't be so sensitive, my mother said, not looking up from her plate. Pass the salt before you go. I didn't pass the salt. I walked out the front door and stood on the porch for a long time, breathing in the cold night air. I looked back through the window. I could see them laughing. My father was patting Julian on the back. My mother was pouring more wine. They looked like a perfect family in a jewelry commercial. I realized then that they weren't holding me back. They were just in my way. I went home to my studio apartment. I didn't cry. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and sent the follow-up email I had been terrified to send for weeks. It was to the procurement head of Apex Industries, the largest client my mother's firm had. They were looking for a new way to handle their regional distribution. I knew my mother's company was struggling to keep the Apex account. I knew their tech was 20 years out of date and their margins were thinning. I had the solution. I just hadn't been sure if I should use it. I clicked send. The silence of my apartment felt better than the noise at that dinner table. For the first time in 25 years, I wasn't waiting for a turn that was never going to come. I was done asking for permission to be successful. I stopped answering the family group chat that night. I stopped showing up for Sunday dinner. I went dark. I worked 16 hours a day. I lived on coffee and frozen meals, and I watched my bank account dwindle to double digits as I poured every cent into my platform. Every time I felt like quitting, I remembered the sound of that wine glass hitting the table. That was the fuel. The 6 months following that Sunday dinner were the quietest and hardest of my life. Walking away from my family didn't just mean skipping a few roasts. It meant losing the only safety net I had ever known. Even if that net was made of glass and ridicule, it was still there. Now, it was gone. I had to move out of my studio apartment when the landlord hiked the rent. I ended up in a basement unit that smelled like damp laundry and old copper. I took a second job as a night shift dispatcher for a local trucking company. It was grueling. I would work my 9 to 5 trying to build my consultancy, then spend 6:00 p.m. to 2:00 a.m. staring at a radio and tracking freight. The emotional cost was one thing, but the physical reality of being, the disappointment, started to show. My skin turned gray from lack of sleep. I lost 12 pounds because my grocery budget was basically a suggestion. Meanwhile, the family group chat, which I hadn't left yet, mostly out of a masochistic need to see the reality of my exile, was a non-stop feed of Julian's success. In July, my mother posted a photo of a brand-new charcoal gray German SUV. The caption read, "So proud of Julian. His new venture is already paying off. A leader needs a reliable ride." I knew the truth. Julian hadn't made a dime. My father had co-signed the lease and paid the first 6 months up front. I was currently taking 2 buses to get to the dispatch office because my 10-year-old sedan had a blown head gasket I couldn't afford to fix. I looked at that photo while sitting on a plastic crate in my basement, eating a bowl of plain white rice. The contrast wasn't just unfair, it was intentional. They weren't just helping him, they were signaling to me what I had walked away from. The first undeniable cost hit when my cousin Sarah got married. Sarah and I had been close growing up, but the Sophia is being difficult narrative had clearly taken hold. I received an invitation, but 2 days later my mother called. It was the first time we had spoken since the wine glass hit the table. "Sophia," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "I'm calling about Sarah's wedding. Your father and I think it's best if you don't attend the rehearsal dinner. We've told the family you're struggling with some personal issues and need space. It would be awkward for you to be there while Julian is celebrating his new board seat." "I'm not struggling, Mom," I said, my voice shaking. I'm building something." "Honey, let's not do this," she sighed. "You're living in a basement. You're working at a call center. It's embarrassing for everyone. Just stay home, focus on getting your life back together, and maybe by Christmas, we can move past this business phase of yours." She hung up before I could tell her that the call center job had given me the exact data I needed to finalize my bidding algorithm for Apex Industries. I didn't go to the wedding at all. I couldn't afford the dress, the gift, or the humiliation of being the troubled relative everyone whispered about in the buffet line. I spent that Saturday night in the dispatch office, routing 12-ton rigs through a thunderstorm. The damage wasn't just in my bank account. It was the realization that my presence in the family was conditional. I was allowed to be there as long as I was the steady assistant who made Julian look better by comparison. The moment I tried to stand on my own, I became a liability to their brand. August was the breaking point. My business, Vantage Logistics, was officially ready to launch. I had my website, my legal filings, and my first 3 pilot contracts. I didn't have an office, so I decided to do a small, virtual launch. I posted the announcement on my professional social media. I waited. I thought maybe, seeing the actual work, the logos, the testimonials, the hard data, they would finally offer a good job. Nothing. My mother liked the post but didn't comment. My father ignored it entirely. Julian, however, sent a private message. "Cute site, Soph. Who did you copy the layout from? Let me know when you're ready for a real job. My ecotech firm is looking for a receptionist. $15 an hour. Family discount." I didn't reply. I deleted the message and blocked his number. I realized then that there was no earning their respect. Respect is something given to people you see as equals. They saw me as a resource, and when a resource starts having its own ideas, you don't applaud it, you replace it. That was the week the heat went out in my basement. I sat in a puffer jacket at my desk, my breath visible in the air, cold calling the leads I had scraped together. Every no I got on the phone felt like my mother's laughter. Every not interested felt like Julian's smirk. I was broke, I was exhausted, and I was completely alone. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me I was good enough. I knew I was. I was the only one who had paid the entry fee for my own life. That was the first lie I stopped telling myself, that I needed them to see me to exist. I existed just fine in the dark. While I was counting pennies in my freezing basement, the family narrative was undergoing a convenient transformation. I didn't find out from a phone call or an apology. I found out through the glowing screen of my phone, which had become my only window into the world they still inhabited. It started with a post on my mother's professional LinkedIn page. She had shared a link to a local business journal that had done a small blurb on rising female founders in the region. My company, Vantage Logistics, was mentioned in the final paragraph. My mother had captioned the post, "So proud of my daughter Sophia for following in my footsteps. I always knew her grit would lead her to launch Vantage. It's been a joy to mentor her through the startup phase." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. She hadn't mentored me. She had mocked me. She hadn't even known the name of my company until she saw it in a press release. But to her social circle and her clients, she was the visionary matriarch who had cultivated my success. The harm wasn't just emotional anymore, it was structural. She was using my independent success to bolster her own company's reputation at a time when they were visibly bleeding. People in the comments, local bank managers, vendors, and even some of my potential leads were congratulating her on the family legacy. Meanwhile, the investment they had actually made was rotting. Julian's ecotech venture had officially collapsed. I knew this because he had started selling his designer clothes on the same local marketplaces I used to find used office equipment. But my parents couldn't admit he had failed. To do so would be to admit they had thrown 6 figures into a furnace. Instead, they doubled down. They used the prestige they were gaining from my name to secure a bridge loan for Julian's next phase. They were literally borrowing against the success of a daughter they had exiled, just to keep their golden son from having to get a real job. The breaking point of this phase came during a regional networking mixer. I wasn't invited, of course, but a former colleague texted me a photo. It was my mother, standing in the center of a group of influential business owners, holding a glass of wine. She was showing them a digital mock-up of my company's new dashboard on her tablet. "We're looking at a merger soon," she was reportedly telling them. "Sophia's tech and my infrastructure. It's the natural evolution of the family firm." She was selling a lie to save her skin. Her firm was losing contracts because they were slow and expensive. By claiming I was under her wing, she was tricking her remaining clients into believing they would soon have access to my bidding system. She was benefiting from the very lack of potential she had laughed at 6 months prior. I realized then that my silence was being used as consent. Because I wasn't there to contradict her, she was free to rewrite the last 25 years. In her version of the story, the Sunday dinner mockery never happened. The basement didn't exist. The 2 jobs didn't exist. There was only her guidance and my inherited talent. The injustice felt like a physical weight. I was the one working 16-hour days. I was the one who had developed the bidding algorithm that was actually moving freight more efficiently than anyone in the tri-state area. And yet, she was the one receiving the handshakes. The threat moved outside the family when I received a call from a mid-sized manufacturer I had been courting. "Sophia," the owner said, sounding hesitant, "I saw your mother's post. I didn't realize Vantage was a subsidiary of her firm. To be honest, we had a bad experience with her billing department last year. If you're part of her umbrella, I don't think we can move forward with the contract." My mother wasn't just stealing my credit, she was actively poisoning my pipeline with her own bad reputation. Her support was a parasite. I stayed up all night that Tuesday, drafting a cease and desist letter in my head, but I knew that would only make me look like the unstable daughter they already claimed I was. I needed something bigger. I needed a clean break that they couldn't spin. I saw a post on the family Facebook page the next morning. My father had posted a photo of the 3 of them, Mom, Dad, and Julian, at an expensive steakhouse. The caption read, "Celebrating big wins for the family businesses. Success is in the blood." I was the one who had provided the win, but I wasn't at the table. I wasn't even mentioned by name. I was just the blood they were using to keep their own hearts beating. That was when I stopped being hurt and started being precise. I realized that as long as I was a daughter, I was a character in their play. I had to become a competitor. I looked at my whiteboard. At the very top, I had one name circled in red, Apex Industries. They were my mother's biggest client, and I knew for a fact their contract was up for renewal in 60 days. If my mother wanted to claim we were in business together, I was going to show her exactly what that looked like. I wasn't going to send a letter. I was going to take the one thing that kept her company alive. I called my contact at Apex. I didn't ask for a favor, I asked for a formal pitch meeting. "I heard you were working with your mother," the procurement assistant said. "You heard wrong," I replied. "I'm the one who's going to replace her." By the time October bled into November, the walls of my isolation were finally starting to push back. But the pressure didn't come from a place of healing. It came from the intersection of my mother's desperation and my sudden professional momentum. The spillover into my second arena, the industry itself, happened during the first week of the month. I was at the trucking terminal for my night shift, finishing a manifest for a fleet of reefers, when my personal phone began to vibrate incessantly. It was a sequence of alerts from a regional business news aggregator. The headline made my stomach drop. Lumi's Logistics faces client exodus amid internal restructuring. Rumors of family merger with tech startup Vantage circulate. My mother hadn't just been lying to her peers at Mixers. She had leaked a planned merger to the local press to stop her stock from plummeting and to keep her creditors at bay. She was using my company as a life raft for her sinking ship without ever asking for my coordinates. The dread was a cold, sharp thing. This wasn't just a family lie anymore. This was a professional hijacking. If I didn't publicly deny the merger, I was complicit in her fraud. If I did deny it, I would be publicly attacking my own mother in a small, status-obsessed business community that valued family loyalty above almost everything else. I was staring at the screen when a call came through. It wasn't a reporter. It was my mother. "Sophia," she said, her voice sounding frantic but still maintaining that edge of command. "I assume you've seen the news. We need to meet tomorrow, my office." "There is no merger, Mom," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "You leaked that to the press. You're lying to your investors." "I'm saving our legacy," she snapped. "Your little project is the only thing the analysts like right now. Apex is breathing down my neck, demanding to know why our tech isn't matching the regional benchmarks. If I tell them we're merging with Vantage, they'll renew the contract. It's a win-win. You get my infrastructure and I get your, whatever it is you built." "I built a company that works," I said, "and I'm not giving it to you." "Don't be a fool," she hissed. "You're a 25-year-old girl in a basement. You think you can handle a Tier 1 account like Apex on your own? You'll be crushed in a month. Hand over the IP, let Julian take the COO lead to handle the visions side, and we'll give you a generous salary and a nice title. Director of Operations. It sounds much better than unemployed daughter, doesn't it?" She wasn't even hiding the contempt anymore. She wanted my brain, she wanted my tech, and she wanted to give the keys to the brother who had already burned through $500,000 of my father's savings. "No," I said. "Sophia, the answer is no. Stop using my name in your press releases." I hung up, but the interference didn't stop. 10 minutes later, a voicemail arrived from Julian. His tone was smug, the sound of someone who had already spent the money he hadn't earned yet. "Hey sis," he began, and I could practically hear the smirk. "Look, Mom's a bit stressed, but we're all on the same team here. I've already drafted the new org chart. I'm thinking we move your bidding system into a new subsidiary under my name. It'll look better for the Apex board. They want to see a certain profile at the helm. Just send over the login credentials and the source code tonight. Don't make this difficult. We're trying to help you." The profile he meant was a man with a prestigious last name and a shiny new SUV he didn't pay for. The story was getting bigger than our Sunday dinner table. It was spilling into the offices of every vendor I worked with. My lead developer called me an hour later, worried. "Sophia, I'm seeing reports that we're being bought out by Lumis," he said. "The team is nervous. We signed on with you because you're independent." We don't want to work for your mother's firm. Their reputation for late payments is legendary. The family was now a direct threat to my livelihood. They weren't just mocking my ambition, they were actively sabotaging my team's morale and my clients' trust. They were trying to force a merger by making it impossible for me to survive as an independent entity. The weight of it was nearly unbearable. I was fighting a war on two fronts, trying to scale a business with no capital while defending that same business from a hostile takeover by my own parents. I went back to my manifest, but my hands were shaking. I looked around the gritty, grease-stained dispatch office. It was a world of hard facts and heavy steel. In this world, you either moved the freight or you didn't. There was no vision, no potential, and no family legacy. There was only the contract. I realized then that the only way to stop them wasn't to argue. It was to outcompete them so thoroughly that the family ties they were clinging to became a noose instead of a lifeline. I opened my laptop and checked my calendar. The Apex Industries procurement review was in 3 days. My mother thought she was using me to secure her future. She had no idea I had already been invited to the table, not as her daughter, but as her replacement. I spent the rest of my night shift drafting the most aggressive bid of my life. I didn't just include my bidding algorithm. I included a side-by-side comparison of my overhead versus Lumi's logistics. I showed, in black and white, exactly how much money my mother was wasting on Julian's failed experiments and her own inflated salary. It was a cold move. It was a business move. It was exactly the kind of move my mother had claimed I didn't have the stomach for. As the sun started to rise over the terminal, I felt a strange, quiet peace. The support staff was gone. The rough draft was finished. I wasn't just building a company anymore. I was building a cage, and I was going to invite them all to the grand opening. I was sitting in a generic, glass-walled conference room at Apex Industries when the door opened. I had my laptop open and my presentation queued up, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. This was the moment that would either validate the last 6 months of misery or prove my mother right. Marcus, the procurement director, walked in. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a way of moving that suggested he didn't like his time being wasted. He didn't shake my hand immediately. Instead, he sat down, opened a thick file, and looked at me for a long beat. "You're a hard person to track down, Sophia," he said. "Your mother's office told my assistant you were on a sabbatical in Europe. Then they told us you had been moved to a specialized, creative role within Lumi's logistics and weren't taking external meetings." I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. They weren't just trying to merge with me, they were actively trying to disappear me. They were telling the biggest client in the region that I was essentially a ghost. "I'm right here, Marcus," I said, my voice steadying. "And I'm not part of Lumi's. I'm the sole owner of Vantage. I have no sabbatical planned, and I certainly don't report to my mother." Marcus leaned back, tapping a pen against the table. "I've seen your bidding algorithm. We ran a simulation on your pilot data. It's better than what Lumi's is providing. Significantly better. But I have to be honest, the drama surrounding your family is a red flag. We don't do business with soap operas." "It's not a soap opera," I said. "It's a transition. Lumi's is using 20-year-old software and a bloated middle management structure to justify their margins. I'm using a lean, automated system that I built myself. My mother isn't my mentor. She's my competitor." Marcus looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. The silence in the room stretched. This was the clarity I needed. It wasn't about being good enough for a Sunday dinner. It was about being the best option for a multi-million-dollar corporation. "Your mother came in here last week," Marcus said quietly. "She told me that you were a talented girl, but that you lacked the temperament for the big leagues. She said Julian, your brother, would be taking over the logistics strategy for the new contract period while you handled the interface design. She called it a stabilizing move for the family firm. I felt a coldness settle over me. They were trying to take my brain and put Julian's face on it. They were willing to lie to a Tier 1 client just to keep their golden child in a suit he didn't earn. Julian couldn't explain the difference between a reefer's manifest and a bill of lading if his life depended on it, I said. If you sign with Loomis, you're signing with a ghost ship. If you sign with Vantage, you're signing with the person who wrote the code. Marcus didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders dropped. He pulled a document from his folder, a draft contract. I've been doing this for 30 years, Sophia. I've seen a lot of visionaries who can't do the math. Your math is the only thing that's made sense in this office for 3 months. He pushed the paper toward me. It wasn't a final contract yet. It was a letter of intent. But it was exclusive. It stated that Apex Industries would only move forward with the regional distribution contract if Vantage Logistics was the lead provider, independent of any parent firm. I don't care who you eat Thanksgiving dinner with, Marcus said. I care about my bottom line. Your mother is losing this account because she spent more time talking about your family legacy than she did about my shipping delays. You showed up with a solution. I looked at the letter of intent. This was the backup. This was the external, objective proof that I wasn't the rough draft. I was the one who was actually keeping the industry moving while my family was playing dress-up in their corporate offices. There's one more thing, Marcus added as I reached for my pen. There's a local networking banquet next Thursday. The business community is small. Your mother has been very vocal about this merger. I've been invited to sit at her table. She thinks we're signing the renewal there in front of everyone. She's planning a performance, I said. She is, Marcus agreed. And I don't like being used as a prop. I'm going to attend that banquet, but I'm going as your guest. I think it's time the family legacy met the reality of the market. As I signed that letter, the weight of the last 6 months started to lift. The damp basement, the night shifts at the terminal, the skipped meals, they all crystallized into this single sheet of paper. I wasn't just a daughter they could laugh at anymore. I was a vendor they couldn't afford to lose. I left the Apex building and walked to my car. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I went back to my basement, but I didn't turn on the space heater. I didn't need it. The support Marcus provided wasn't just a contract, it was a mirror. He saw me as a CEO because I was acting like one. My family saw me as an assistant because that's what they needed me to be. The leverage was now real. I had the signed intent. I had the technical superiority. And I had the support of the one man who could dismantle my mother's professional world with a single phone call. I opened my laptop and checked the formal invitation to the banquet. It was embossed with the Loomis Logistics logo. Celebrating 25 years of excellence and the future of family, it read. I clicked accept. I had spent my whole life being the audience for their success. Now they were going to be the audience for mine. The leverage didn't feel like a weapon at first. It felt like a heavy, cold weight in my laptop bag. Inside that bag was the signed letter of intent from Apex Industries and a printed transcript of the family group chat from 6 months ago, the night of the Sunday dinner. I sat in my basement office, staring at my mother's latest text. Sophia, the banquet is tomorrow at 7:00. Wear something professional but not too busy. I've told the caterers you're part of the Loomis party. We're sitting at table 1 with Marcus and the Apex board. This is a big night for the family name. Don't be late. She was still directing me. She was still treating me like a prop she could move around the stage. She truly believed that because she had birthed me, she owned the rights to everything I produced. I looked at the transcript. Mother, he has real potential. You don't. Julian, leave the heavy lifting to the entrepreneurs, Soph. I had those words saved in 3 different places. They were the confirmation of the early feedback I was going to thank her for. I spent Thursday morning at a co-working space, finalizing the transition plan for the Apex account. I wasn't just taking the contract, I was taking the infrastructure. I had already reached out to 3 of my mother's top logistics coordinators, the ones who actually did the work while she was at lunches. I offered them jobs at Vantage with better pay and a stake in the company. All 3 signed by noon. The leverage was now a closed circuit. I had the client. I had the staff. I had the technology. And I had the documented proof of the cruelty that had driven me to build it all. My mother was heading into a banquet to celebrate a merger with a company that was currently hollowing out her own firm from the inside. I called Marcus one last time before the event. "Are we still on?" I asked. "I've got my suit pressed, Sophia," he said. "Your mother's assistant called twice today to confirm my seat at the Loomies table. I told them I'd be arriving with my own party." She sounded confused. "She won't be for long," I said. "One thing," Marcus added. "She's planning to announce Julian as the new strategic lead for the Apex transition. She's already had the programs printed." I leaned back in my chair. A month ago, that would have made me cry. Now it just made me smile. It was the perfect setup. They were leaning so far into the lie that they were about to fall off the edge of the world. I went to a local boutique that afternoon. I didn't buy something not too busy. I bought a sharp, tailored navy blazer and trousers. I bought heels that made me stand 2 inches taller than Julian. I was done being the girl who cleared the plates. I looked at myself in the 3-way mirror. The woman looking back didn't look like a rough draft. She looked like a founder. She looked like a competitor. The risk was high. If I failed at the banquet, I'd be seen as a vindictive daughter who tried to ruin her mother's career. But the truth was, I wasn't ruining anything. I was just letting the house of cards fall. My mother had built a reputation on my work and Julian's potential. Neither of those things belonged to her. I walked out of the store with the garment bag over my arm. I felt a strange sense of readiness. It was the feeling of a predator who had finally stopped pretending to be prey. I checked my phone one last time. My father had sent a message to the group chat. "Big night for the team. Proud of my kids. See you at 7:00. I didn't reply, I just deleted the chat from my phone. I didn't need the record anymore, I knew exactly what was said. The leverage was activated. The trap was set. My mother thought she was parading her success. She didn't realize she was walking into a repossession. I drove back to my basement to get ready. As I put on the blazer, I felt the letter of intent in the inner pocket. It felt like a shield. Tonight, the support staff was going to speak. And for the first time in 25 years, the whole room was going to have to listen. The invitation to the banquet was sitting on my passenger seat, a thick slab of cream-colored cardstock that felt more like a summons than a social gesture. I spent the hour before the event sitting in my car in a parking lot 3 blocks away, practicing my breathing. I wasn't the girl in the basement anymore, but my body still remembered the flinch. Logistically, I had moved every piece into place. My bid with Apex was locked, the staff transitions were signed, and I had a digital folder on my phone containing every scrap of evidence I needed. But the final move was the most dangerous one. I had to walk into that room and let my mother believe she had won until the very second the floor dropped out. I stepped out of the car. The evening air was crisp, smelling of autumn and car exhaust. I smoothed my navy blazer, checked my reflection in the window, and started walking. When I reached the grand doors of the ballroom, I saw the Loomies Logistics banner draped over the entrance. A legacy of excellence. It was a local networking banquet, but my mother had clearly turned it into a coronation. The room was filled with the heavy scent of expensive perfume and the clinking of hundreds of cocktail glasses. These were the people who had watched me clear the plates 6 months ago. These were the people my mother had lied to. I hadn't been in the room for 5 minutes before I saw her. My mother was wearing a gown that probably cost more than my first 3 months of rent. She was holding a martini, laughing with a group of regional bankers. Julian was beside her, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo that was clearly too tight in the shoulders. He was nursing a drink and nodding at things he didn't understand. My mother's eyes found me across the room. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just tilted her head, signaling me to come to her. It was the same gesture she used for the family dog. I walked over, my heels clicking on the polished marble. "You're late," she whispered as I reached the group. She didn't introduce me. She just grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my blazer. "Marcus is already at the bar. He's been asking about the technical specs for the transition. Julian tried to talk to him, but he needs you to clarify some of the bidding logic." "Do not embarrass us, Sophia." "I won't embarrass myself, Mom," I said. "Good, because after the main course, I'm announcing the merger. I've already talked to the editor of the Business Journal. They're doing a cover story on the 3 pillars of Loomis. You, me, and Julian." She said it with such casual confidence that it almost made me sick. She truly believed that she could just command my reality. She had no idea that the pillar she was leaning on was already gone. The risk move was staying silent. I let her lead me toward table 1. I let her seat me next to Julian, who smelled like expensive bourbon and cheap desperation. "Hey, sis," Julian muttered, leaning in. "Mom says you're going to handle the back-end integration while I front the client meetings. It's a good split. I've got the face for the big deals, you've got the whatever it is you do with the numbers." "You have no idea what I do, Julian," I said, looking him directly in the eye. He laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "I know you're finally doing what's best for the family. That's all that matters." Across the table, Marcus arrived. He looked at me, then at my mother, then back at me. He didn't give anything away. He sat down and ordered a mineral water. "Marcus," my mother beamed, leaning forward. "We were just discussing the transition. Julian has some wonderful ideas for the eco-expansion of the Apex fleet." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "I'd be interested to hear how that fits into the bidding algorithm Sophia developed." Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at my mother. "It's a collaborative effort," my mother said smoothly. "Sophia handles the raw data and Julian translates it into a market-ready vision. It's the Loomis way." I felt the letter of intent in my pocket. It felt like it was glowing. I looked around the room. There were 200 people here, the elite of our business community. My mother had spent 25 years building this stage. She had invited every witness she could find to watch her greatest triumph. The waiter arrived with the first course. The room began to settle into that rhythmic hum of a high-stakes dinner. I looked at the program on the table. Under the heading Keynote Presentation, it listed Loomis Logistics, the Next Generation, presented by Aliner and Julian Loomis. My name wasn't on the program. I wasn't a pillar. I was the hidden foundation they intended to bury. I reached into my bag and turned my phone to silent. I felt a strange, cold calm. I was at the threshold. In less than an hour, the support staff was going to walk onto that stage and tell the truth. I looked at my mother, who was currently laughing at a joke Marcus hadn't made. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. She looked like the woman who had told me I had no potential while I sat at the end of her table. I took a sip of water. The countdown had reached 0. "Enjoy the meal, Mom," I said quietly. "It's the last one you're ever going to charge to this firm." She didn't even hear me. She was too busy smiling for the cameras. The main course was cleared, and the room transitioned into that expectant, high-stakes silence that precedes a corporate announcement. Waiters moved like shadows, topping off wine glasses with a pale, expensive Chardonnay. My mother stood up, smoothing her gown. She looked radiant under the spotlights, the very image of a successful matriarch. She walked toward the podium at the front of the ballroom. As she passed my chair, she squeezed my shoulder again, her rings pressing into my skin. It wasn't an affectionate gesture. It was a tether, Ladies and gentlemen, my mother began, her voice amplified and honey smooth. 25 years ago, Lumi's Logistics was just a dream and 2 trucks. Today, we stand on the precipice of our greatest evolution. In business, as in life, legacy is everything. It's about who we pass the torch to. She paused for effect, smiling at the front table where the local press had their cameras ready. I am thrilled to announce that Lumi's Logistics will be merging with Vantage Logistics, a tech-forward firm founded by my daughter, Sophia. This merger represents a homecoming. It's the union of experience and innovation. And to lead this new chapter, I am appointing my son, Julian Lumis, as the strategic lead for the Apex Industries account transition. The room erupted in polite, rhythmic applause. Julian stood up, beaming, buttoning his tight tuxedo jacket. He waved to the crowd as if he'd just won an Olympic medal. People at the neighboring tables reached out to shake my father's hand. My mother beckoned toward our table. "Sophia, Julian, please join me." Julian started toward the stage, his chest puffed out. I stood up slowly. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was beating with a cold, mechanical precision. I walked to the podium and stood to the left of the microphone. Julian took the right. My mother stood between us, her arms linked through ours, presenting us like a set of matched bookends. "A few words from our new leadership," my mother whispered, nudging Julian toward the mic. "I just want to say," Julian began, his voice cracking slightly with unearned confidence, "that I'm honored to take the helm of the Apex account. We have big visions for the future. We're going to disrupt the market. My sister has done some great groundwork on the technical side, and I'm looking forward to scaling that into a global brand." He stepped back, looking at me with a patronizing grin. It was the same smirk from the Sunday dinner. My mother stepped to the mic. "Sophia, a word for our partners." I stepped forward. I didn't look at the cameras, I looked at table 1. I looked at Marcus, who was leaning back with his arms crossed, watching me with a neutral expression. "Thank you, Mother," I said. My voice was clear, it didn't shake. "And thank you, Julian. It's interesting to hear your vision for the account, considering you've never actually seen the Vantage source code." The applause didn't stop all at once. It tapered off into a confused, jagged silence. My mother's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went wide. She reached out to grab my hand, but I stepped an inch away. "I want to thank my mother for her early feedback on my business," I continued, speaking directly into the microphone. "6 months ago, at our family dinner, she told me that Julian has real potential and that I don't. She told me I was the support staff of this family. She laughed in my face when I showed her my business plan." A collective gasp moved through the room. I saw a local bank manager drop his dessert spoon. It hit the china with a sharp ping. My father stood up at the table, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. "Sophia, that's enough," my mother hissed, her voice a sharp stage whisper. "Get off the stage." "I took that feedback to heart," I said, ignoring her. "I realized that if I didn't have potential in her firm, I would have to create it elsewhere. So I did. I built Vantage Logistics in a basement while working night shifts as a dispatcher. I built it without a single dollar of family investment or a single word of mentorship." Julian stepped forward, trying to crowd me away from the mic. "She's just emotional, folks. It's a big night. Sophia, let's go sit down." "I'm not finished," I said. I pulled the folded letter of intent from my blazer pocket and held it up. "There will be no merger. Vantage Logistics is not for sale, and it is not a subsidiary of Lumis. I am the 100% sole owner, and I do not take orders from the strategic lead of a failing company." The room was now deathly silent. My mother's face was a mask of pure, cold fury. She looked like she wanted to strike me, but the cameras were still rolling. She was trapped in the very spotlight she had spent thousands of dollars to create. "You're finished in this town," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've just ruined everything. Actually, Marcus's voice rang out from table 1. He stood up, his tall frame drawing every eye in the room. He didn't look at my mother, he looked at me. As the procurement director for Apex Industries, I'd like to clarify something for the record. Marcus walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for him like a tide. He stepped up to the second microphone. Apex Industries has officially declined the contract renewal with Loomis Logistics, Marcus said. The words hit the room like a physical blow. My mother actually staggered back a step, her hand going to the podium for support. We found their operations to be outdated and their management distracted. We have, however, signed an exclusive letter of intent with Vantage Logistics. We chose Sophia because she operates independently. We chose her because her technology is superior. And frankly, we chose her because she's the only person in this family who actually knows how to move a shipment. My mother looked at Marcus, then at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the room full of her peers, the people she had spent decades trying to impress. They weren't looking at her with admiration anymore. They were looking at her with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. "This is a misunderstanding," Julian stammered, stepping toward Marcus. "The family. We support each other. Sophia is our vendor," Marcus cut him off. "You are a guest. Please step away from the microphone." Julian froze. He looked around the room, realizing for the first time that his father's checkbook couldn't buy his way out of this. He looked small. He looked like the 30-year-old dependent he actually was. I stepped back to the mic for one last time. "I started my business from nothing because I was told I was a punchline. Tonight, the joke is over. Vantage will begin taking over the Apex accounts on Monday. We are hiring, by the way. But we have a very strict policy against nepotism." I walked off the stage. I didn't wait for the applause, which was scattered and awkward. I didn't look at my father, who was shouting something at Marcus. I didn't look at my mother, who had slumped into a chair on the stage, her Legacy of Excellence banner hanging mockingly over her head. I walked straight to the exit. As I reached the doors, I saw the local business reporter frantically typing on her laptop. The headline tomorrow wasn't going to be about the 3 pillars. I stepped out into the night air. The silence of the street felt like a reward. Behind me in the ballroom, the networking had stopped. The elite of the city were recalculating. They were moving away from the sinking ship of Loomis and looking for the person who had actually won. I stood by my car and took a deep breath. My lungs felt bigger. The world felt wider. I wasn't the rough draft anymore. I was the final word. The aftermath of the banquet didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like a controlled demolition. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already lighting up with notifications. The local business community is a small, tight-knit ecosystem, and word of the Apex reversal traveled faster than the valets could park the cars. The immediate consequences were swift. On Monday morning, Loomis Logistics officially received a formal termination notice from Apex Industries. Without that anchor client, their credit lines were frozen. Within 48 hours, 3 other mid-sized vendors followed Marcus's lead and pulled their contracts. My mother's Legacy of Excellence didn't survive the week. Julian didn't find a visionary way to save the firm. Instead, he did what he always did. He vanished when the work got hard. I heard through a cousin that he had moved 2 states away to rebrand. Likely on the last few $1,000s he could scrape from my father's depleted savings. My mother tried to call me once, 3 days after the banquet. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, but it wasn't an apology. She sounded tired, her voice stripped of the honeyed corporate polish. "You don't understand the pressure of keeping a family together, Sophia," she said. "One day you'll realize that loyalty is more important than a contract." I deleted the message. She still didn't get it. Loyalty isn't a debt you extract from people you've spent a lifetime belittling. Loyalty is a harvest. and she had planted nothing but salt. 6 months later, Vantage Logistics moved into a real office, a converted warehouse with high ceilings and enough room for the 22 employees I had hired, including the coordinators who had fled my mother's firm. I blocked my family's numbers permanently. I didn't do it out of anger, but out of a need for a quiet workspace. You can't build a future if you're constantly listening to the ghosts of your past. I'm 30 now. The business is thriving, but that isn't the part that matters most. The most important thing happened this morning. I arrived at the office early before the team got in. The sun was hitting the glass of my corner office, and the building was silent. I sat at my desk, a heavy, solid piece of oak that I paid for with my own profit, and looked at a framed piece of paper on the wall. It wasn't the Apex contract. It was my very first invoice from that basement studio for $400. It was wrinkled and slightly stained with coffee, but it was the first time someone had looked at my work and said it had value. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out over the city. I realized that my mother was right about one thing. I wasn't like Julian. I didn't have the potential she recognized because my value didn't depend on her approval. I had the only thing that actually lasts in this world, the grit to stay at the table when everyone else is trying to take your chair. Respect isn't something you inherit in a will or receive in a toast. It's built brick by brick, often in the dark, while the people who should love you are busy laughing. I put my coffee down and opened my laptop. I had a busy day ahead, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who was in charge of the vision. What was the hardest, no, you ever had to give to your family to save yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where you finally proved the doubters wrong? Let's talk about it below. If this story resonated with you, you might want to check out my other video about a golden child whose failure exposed a decade of family lies. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about self-made success and finding your own voice.